Hello there, my name is Yamiche. We are going to be reviewing Chinua Achebe's highly acclaimed Things Fall Apart. So before we start, the first thing that we're going to start with is the setting of the story. The story Things Fall Apart is set in an Igbo village by name Omofia. The timing is pre-colonial era, so that we're talking about the 1800s period. So that is the time frame within which this story is set. Remember that Chinua Achebe wrote this book in 1958, just the year after Ghana won independence. Now the story carried a lot of weight because of the angle that was coming from. Prior to that, not much had been heard from the African continent when it came to our side of the story. All that was written about the African continent was how it was filled with primitive savage people that had been rescued and were being now civilized by superior race. But Things Fall Apart gave a voice from the continent. Chinua Achebe told the story of the Igbo people, or rather let me say the Omofia people, from their perspective, and it shed a lot of light on just the amount of intricacies that were woven into the fabric of their society. It showed that their society was not a group of primitive people as people assumed at that time, and that there was a lot that could come from there. So before we continue, let me just mention that I've made notes on my phone so that I don't forget anything whilst we're doing this. So pardon me if you see that I'm looking down here. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the summary of the plot. Things Fall Apart is centered around our main character, protagonist, Okonkwo. Okonkwo is a man that lives in Omofia. He's the son of Unoka. Now, it is important that we state the relationship between Okonkwo and his father, since the attitude of his father is the result of the man that Okonkwo is in the story. His father was a lazy man. He had no farms. He wasn't wealthy. He owed a lot of debt, and he was not respected in his society. Now, having a father like that, Okonkwo hated who his father represented so much that he worked extremely hard to make sure that he did not toil in the line of his father. So if you see, the story starts with an introduction to who Okonkwo is, a young man that rose to fame when he beat a famous wrestler in that town, who worked very hard and earned a lot of wealth. He was a successful farmer, had a big family, strong, masculine man. Everything that was an opposite of what his father represented is what Okonkwo strived to be. Now, Okonkwo made a lot for himself. He was one of the leaders in his society, a very respectable man. So then, as you see the plot develop, telling us of who Okonkwo is and the wealth that he has acquired, inserts the story of Mfana. Now, Mfana is a captive from another village that is entrusted into the hands of Okonkwo for him to take care of. Now, it is prudent to mention here that Okonkwo has a first son, Inwoye. And Okonkwo has an issue with his son because he feels as though the boy represents a lot of characteristics that he saw in his father that he hated. Because of that, there's a lot of tension and animosity between Okonkwo and his son if you are reading the book. Mfana comes in and he represents everything that Okonkwo would want in a son. He's masculine, he's strong, he's hardworking. He represents everything that society would want to see in a man at that time. So for a period, Okonkwo is at peace because Mfana has a good or positive influence on his son. However, this period of bliss does not last for long. The gods of his village, Omofia. So the gods of Omofia request that Mfana is sacrificed to appease the gods. Now, we had to realize that as the story is woven, you realize that Okonkwo and Mfana develop a relationship of mutual respect. Okonkwo turns to love the boy as his own son, and the boy the same towards Okonkwo. During the period where Mfana is said to be sacrificed, Okonkwo unfortunately is the one that lands the fatal blow that kills the boy. So for a minute, you see that the story moves from a place of happiness where the Okonkwo household is happy to a state of sadness because everybody in the household tend to love the boy, especially Okonkwo and his son. This period of unfortunate incidences does not seem to end, as soon afterwards, during the funeral of a tribal man, Okonkwo ends up killing the son of the dead man by accident. Since the death was not caused intentionally and was accidental, Okonkwo is banished from his home of Omofia and relocates to his mother's village. Despite the fact that Okonkwo is hugely successful in his mother's village, he hates every period and every single time that he spent in that village, because he yearns to be with his father's village, he yearns to be at the place where his persona, who he came to represent, was built. Finally, exile is over. Okonkwo goes back to Omofia, but the Omofia that he dreamt of returning to is no longer the same. This is where we see the advent of the introduction of the white man into the Igbo society. Things have changed. A new religion has been introduced to the town, that's Christianity. Okonkwo hates this new development that has happened to his town. He realizes that the society is not as closely knit as it was, and to make matters worse, his son Inwoye converts to Christianity. From that period on, you realize in the book that Okonkwo no longer has a relationship with his son, and has a wealth of hate for the missionaries, for Christianity, for everything that represents what is not right in his society at that time. During this period, Okonkwo, being the voice of strength and masculinity and fight and bravery and all of that, tries to rally his clanmen together to fight these missionaries. They refuse, and on one such occasion, Okonkwo ends up killing a messenger from a high court. Now, the story ends rather tragically, as after this happens and his tribal men abandon him after the death, Okonkwo commits suicide. And that's how the story ends. Our once proud, strong, great protagonist ends up in tragedy by committing suicide. And in Omofia society, or rather Igbo society, I might say, if a man commits suicide, it's considered a curse. He's not buried properly with respect, and his body is cast into the evil forest. So that is how our story ends, and it's a thought-provoking story that brings out a lot of things, and it creates insights, brings depth into Igbo society and the complexity of it, the intricacies that are involved in it, and how colonialism, or the introduction of white men into Igbo society, did not change them, for lack of a better word, from a primitive state into a more civilized one, I might say. So that is how the story works, that is how our protagonist ends, and that's how the story of Things Fall Apart comes to a close. The last thing that we are going to look at when it comes to Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart is his use of literary devices. Now, his use of literary devices makes the story a very beautiful one that a reader will enjoy thoroughly. Now, a few examples of some of the literary devices Chinua Achebe uses in Things Fall Apart are irony, foreshadowing, symbolism, euphemism, and a host of others. For example, when I talk about foreshadowing, Okonkwo's exile to his mother's land after he accidentally killed a tribal man is a foreshadowing of his own death. We realize that Okonkwo is unable to adapt to change. So when he is exiled to his mother's homeland, even though he is wildly successful, he's still thrown into a state of depression, and family have to rally in to make sure that they bring him out of it. So if you're looking at this, then it makes it less surprising to find out that when Okonkwo comes back to Omofia and meets the greatest change of all, he's unable to cope with it and ends up committing suicide. Another example of this is symbolism. You realize that throughout the story, yam is referred to as a man's crop, and it is associated with how a man is seen. For example, in the story, during certain parts of it, you realize that Okonkwo talks about how Okonkwo concentrates on farming yam, which he sees as a man's crop, and leaves the cultivation of cocoyam to his wives and children, which he sees as a woman's crop. So symbolism is another thing that is widely used in the story. Another thing that we see used in the story a lot is flashback. For example, Okonkwo at the beginning of the story flashes back to his fight Amalikis, yeah, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, who was seen as a cat, very wiry. So then it's a flashback to how his fame began in his village or Mafia. Another literary device that we see strongly used throughout the novel is the use of ironies. For example, it is very ironic. Okonkwo, due to his father's failure, proves himself to be a very worthy farmer. He creates wealth through farming with the hopes of passing it on to his son Nwoye, who in the end disappoints his father and doesn't even turn out to be a farmer like he thought he would in the beginning. So social disintegration is another theme that runs strongly throughout the story. You realize in the beginning of the story how closely knit the fabric of their society was. But during the advent of the introduction of European missionaries into their town, you realize that the people could no longer stand together as one. There were factions in the society that prior to didn't exist. So social disintegration is another theme that runs strongly throughout the story. So that's it for today's episode of our book reviews. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed yourself as much as I did. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section. I'll be more than willing to reply them as best as I can. Be sure to tune in next week Monday, where we'll be reviewing another book, Ama Frempoma by Bright Kweku Apia. I'll see you then. Bye.